So where exactly is Norway? It's the extreme north of Europe, bordered by Sweden, Finland, and a little bit of Russia to the east, and bounded by the Arctic Ocean on the west. The west coast of Norway is very rugged, with fjords reaching far inland from the coast, and lots of islands. The Hurtigruten company has 14 ships, with 7 operating on the Norwegian coastal route voyage at any time. This map shows the position of all the ships on the route one day recently. Hurtigruten means fast route. One of their ships leaves Bergen each evening at 6:30 on a 15-day round trip. As the ships meet each other along the route, they greet each other with enthusiasm. Before continuing on their way. We decided to sample one of these voyages, and we flew to London, and then from London we flew up to Bergen. On leaving the airport in Bergen, we saw this sign with the question mark, which we wondered why. Bergen is a very pretty city in the south of Norway with very interesting architecture. There's a lookout on a hill overlooking the city, and one gets nice views of the layout of the city. Then it was time to leave, and we sailed out of the harbour, and on the way out we passed various ships that were used to support the thriving oil and gas industry that supports the Norwegian economy. We were soon travelling along between the islands and the mainland with beautiful scenery on each side. We were lucky that the weather was very clement, with beautiful sunny days and clear skies. Fishing plays a big role in Norway's economy, and we passed many fishing boats as we went along. Only 4% of the land area in Norway is suitable for farming, so farms are on every little scrap of land that can be cultivated. The Norwegian fjords were created during the last ice age, when glaciers carved out the valleys, creating the very deep fjords that run far inland. Each day we were giving a program which showed the ports of call for the following day, and also the route, which sometimes took us far into fjords. Traveling up along the fjords, sometimes we would stop close to a settlement, and a boat would come out and take some passengers and freight off, and then we would carry on. In one case, we went deep into a fjord, and when we got to the end, far up in the countryside, our ship anchored. While we were there, a boat came out and took anybody who wanted to go ashore to sightsee ashore, and brought them back after a period of time. Moira enjoying the trip to shore on the small boat. The settlement we visited was very nice, very interesting to walk around and see how it was organized. Continuing north past lots of settlements along the way. Interesting mountains with all sorts of erosion. Along the way we passed many ferries which served the local area from one side of the fjords to the other. This brought up an interesting coincidence, because when we were in the Caribbean earlier this year, we used this ferry that went from St. Vincent to Bequia Island, where we were, quite frequently. There are a fleet of these ferries serving the islands in the area, and I noticed that where it was painted over, this ferry was registered in Narvik. Now, Narvik is a port in Norway, and apparently these ferries used to serve there before they were sold and transported out to the Caribbean. Typically, when the ship docked, the crew would lower the gangplank and the passengers could get off to go sightseeing. In the evening of the second day, we docked in the town of Alsund, which is known for its Art Deco architectural style from when the town was rebuilt after a fire in 1904. It was very nice to walk around the town in the gathering dusk. The important thing was always to get back on board before sailing time. As we went further north, the temperature dropped and Maura was very lucky to have this very cozy jacket that she enjoyed wearing. As we continued north, we saw some interesting weather patterns and passed some very spectacular scenery. Soon we were approaching another port of call, and as usual, the ferry came alongside very expertly and tied up. Immediately the crew got to work, lowering the ramp and quickly taking cargo off and putting cargo on. And then some cars were driven off. And as we crossed the Arctic Circle, there was a party on deck. And the captain said a few words. And then King Neptune came on board and was welcomed. However, he had problems behaving himself and insisted on throwing ice cubes at the passengers.
Okay.
Then a volunteer was brought up and had ice put on his head and down the back of his shirt, much to everybody's amusement.
So everyone else can be baptized as well. You just come around here, form a nice.
Continuing north, we enjoyed the ever-changing scenery. As we moved further north away from the Arctic Circle, the sun remained low in the sky all day, but it was like having long sunsets. Norway has constructed an extensive network of roads and bridges linking the islands with the mainland, and also a road right down the coast. It's possible to drive from the very north of Norway all the way to the south. We continued to call in ports large and small along the way, and one that we called in was Tromso with its famous Arctic Cathedral. There is also an Arctic Museum which shows life over the ages in the north of Norway, which was quite rugged. More pretty sunsets. The next point of interest was the North Cape, where we booked a trip to take us out by coach through some spectacular scenery to the actual North Cape itself. This is the monument marking the North Cape where everybody has their photograph taken. It was an interesting place, and of course we had to have our photographs taken. On the way back to the ship, we stopped at this rest area with picnic tables which must be very nice in the summer months. Continuing eastbound through some more fjords, we eventually came to our turnaround point in the town of Kirkenes. This is a very remote spot, being only 2,255 kilometers from the North Pole. This was our ship docked in Kirkenes. We decided we would walk into town to see the sights. Kirkenes is a nice little town and very popular with tourists during the summer. We were now only about 7 kilometers from the Russian border, and we were surprised to find a Russian consulate in the town. Also, a lot of the signs were in both Russian and Norwegian. Apparently, in better times, Russians would commute across the border to work in Norway. However, a lot of the feeling in town seemed to be anti-Russian. As we left the town on our southward voyage, we met another ship coming in still on the northward voyage. As we were on the southerly part of the voyage, we passed through areas in the daytime which we had passed through during the night on the way north, so it made it very interesting. In this town there was a church with a steeple made to look like the frames that the fishermen hang the fish to dry on. In this town they decided to paint the majority of the buildings blue. As we approached another bridge, everybody was given Norwegian flags to wave. This is because some passengers had got off at a previous port to go on a tour, and now their coach was passing over a bridge and we could wave to them. When we got into the port, these passengers were all waiting then to rejoin the ship. At all the main ports there was a lot of cargo ready to be picked up. The ship was very comfortable. There was an observation deck where we could sit on these seats with a very good view out the front. We spent a lot of our time up there. We had our computer and all our equipment, and we would relax up there. We had what was called a polar outside cabin. It had 2 beds, one of which converted into a settee during the day. However, we didn't convert the settee very often because we didn't spend much time in the cabin. It was always nice to look out in the mornings and see the scenery. The food on the trip was very good. We had a buffet breakfast and a buffet lunch, and then in the evening we had waiter service for dinner. There was a great variety of food available, most of it locally sourced as we went along. It was always nice to get a table by the window and be able to watch the scenery go by as one had one's meal. Eventually we got to Trondheim, where we had arranged to disembark. Trondheim is located on Trondheim Fjord in central Norway. One of its attractions is the old warehouse buildings along the fjord that are now his residence. We were very interested to find this arrangement on one of the hills. It's called a bicycle lift, and on a bicycle one puts one's right foot in front of this arrangement here, and the footrest on a wire pushes one up the hill. Unfortunately, it wasn't operating while we were there because it was winter. Dating back to the 11th century, The Nidaros Cathedral features a detailed western facade. The cathedral was built over the funeral site of King Olaf II. The fascinating facade. In the west wall there was a very impressive rose stained glass window. The cathedral is a very impressive building to spend time in. Then it was time to leave and we flew back to London, where we spent a few days before flying back to Vancouver.